God instructs Moses to go out to the Nile the following morning and to meet Pharaoh there. Now, how Moses knew where to meet Pharaoh is the subject of a lot of conjecture. Some believe that there was a regular religious rite that occurred at the same spot every day in which Pharaoh was involved. Others believe it could have been part of Pharaoh's normal morning routine to go out to the Nile and perhaps bathe. In any case, there's no chance Pharaoh would have been alone. His royal court would have been with him. Well, Moses pronounces to Pharaoh the coming of the first stroke, the first Nega, or more correctly, Negev. Moses smites the water of the Nile with his shepherd's staff. The Nile turns blood red. Not just the great river itself, but all the canals and ponds and reservoirs that the Egyptians had built, as well as the many branches of the Nile, turned bloody red. Now, this miracle happened over the full length and breadth of Egypt, affecting everyone. Nobody was spared from its effects, and that includes the Hebrews, because they counted on the Nile for water just like everybody else. Even water that was not currently in contact with the Nile, but that had come from it, turned to blood. In the cooking pots, in the storage containers, everything that held water taken from the Nile. Now, interestingly, Egypt's sorcerers were able to imitate this, just as they were able to counterfeit the turning of staffs into snakes. And of course, what would have been better is if Pharaoh's magicians could have overcome and restored the Nile to its freshness. But they didn't, undoubtedly because they couldn't. One would have thought this awesome spectacle of the Nile turning blood red and the royals receiving reports that it occurred everywhere in Egypt might have swayed the Pharaoh. It didn't. Why? Well, in addition to the hardened condition of the Pharaoh's heart, many Bible scholars believe that what occurred here was something that the Egyptians had seen before, just in smaller measure. Every year, at the time of the rise of the Nile, silt would color the water a characteristic red, and the rich nutrients contained in the silt spurred the growth of microorganisms to create an effect that most of us who live near the ocean are familiar with, a red tide. This eats up the necessary oxygen in the water. It kills millions of fish, and it causes a pretty bad stench. This fits very well not only with the scriptural description of what occurred, but also with the God pattern of using nature, but in extraordinary ways. Of course, the miracle was that Moses caused it to happen upon his command. It happened when the Nile was not in its rising season. It even contaminated already drawn water in vessels where the water was being stored. Now, could this have actually been blood, real blood, which is what most Bible versions say? Maybe. I'll give it a good positive maybe. The Hebrew word used here is dam, D-A-M, dam, and it means blood. But dam also means bloody, blood-like, and is even used when referring to wine as the blood of the grape, the dam of the grape. So the use of the word dam can, it often does, by the way, in the Bible, refer to a color. It doesn't necessitate our assuming that the Nile became literal blood. I'm not dogmatic about all this, but when you take this plague in context with all the others, literal blood seems out of place, as all the other plagues used obvious elements of nature, except the 10th one, of course. The other issue is that, spiritually speaking, blood's for atonement. Certainly there's no atonement for Egypt going on here by turning the Nile blood to blood. I'll add to that we're told in verse 24 that everyone had to dig around the Nile for water to drink. In other words, beachgoers, just like when you go to the beach, as you get near the water line, you dig a little hole in the sand, what happens? That hole quickly fills with water that seeps through the sand, right? Just as used in reverse, especially here in Florida and other places where stormwater runoff is channeled into ponds. So the solids and the pollutants are filtered out as the water returns back into the aquifer. So the people of Egypt were able to have the sand filter the red silt and microorganisms out of the tainted water sufficiently they could drink it. No amount of filtering would have solved the problem if the water was no longer water, but it was blood. You can't filter blood well enough for that, certainly not with sand. Besides, the 7 days with absolutely no drinkable water in Egypt would have been a death sentence to hundreds of thousands. And that most certainly was not the aim in this stroke, particularly because the Hebrews were subject to this as well.
For more teachings of real Bible study and to rediscover God's Word with Tom Bradford, visit Torah Class today on the web, streaming TV, or download the Torah Class mobile app.